A warm welcome. This is at HydePark on Ada Derana 24. As Sri Lanka combats to eliminate the COVID-19 pandemic, the novel coronavirus health crisis, along with the rest of the countries across the globe, we thought of speaking to the Foreign Secretary in Sri Lanka, whose missions across other countries of the world have been in the forefront of dealing with expatriate issues. A warm welcome to you, Ambassador Ravinatha Aryasinha, Sri Lanka's Foreign Secretary, who was formerly the permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations. Good evening.
Good evening, Indeewari. Good to be with you.
Yes. Foreign Secretary, let's start off talking about the work of Sri Lankan missions overseas. Since the start of this crisis, even when word went across the globe of a virus that was less known to even the scientific world, the Foreign Ministry had to be in the epicenter of where the virus began, Wuhan. An influx of concerns. We had to rush back Sri Lankan citizens. A group of students were first brought. Since then, we have come a long way to the Foreign Ministry setting up Contact Sri Lanka, to dealing with other issues of Sri Lankan expatriates and students. What is the latest update that you can share with us?
Well, as you say, there have been many phases of the Foreign Ministry's involvement in this whole issue. And rightly, our three missions in China had to deal with something which we didn't know the length and breadth and how it manifests itself. So we were all dealing with a problem which we didn't even understand. In fact, yesterday, if I may say, after a whole lot of conference calls with all our missions, I asked my colleagues in China, the three the acting High Commissioner, acting Ambassador in Beijing, and the Consul Generals in Shanghai and Chengdu and Guangzhou, to write for me a list of do's and don't do's. What you tell people when they come to you, how you give hope, how you help. And I circulated it to all our missions and to all my staff, because I think that those three guys and their staff behind them were true heroes of what dealing with overseas Sri Lankans were. We always do that. I mean, that's part of foreign missions mandate. But I think the magnitude and the scale of this operation has pushed us to limits and to points which we have never, I think, experienced before. We've experienced it in regions, but this we are experiencing across the globe today. So from getting students from Wuhan by a charter flight, and that is the only charter flight which has been flown especially to do this so far, to a whole range of measures taken to facilitate others from China to come, to get back a large number of pilgrims who were in India, again through commercial flights. No charter flights were used in India, to then dealing with each pocket of development in the various countries. Our missions have been in the forefront, and our missions have had to do two sets of things. One has primarily been to deal with an immediate problem. Two, to anticipate where this could go. Because I don't think any of us quite know. It's easy to say this is going to be the next epicenter, that is going to be the next epicenter.
We never saw it moving to Europe.
Absolutely. But we have to be ready to face it wherever it is. And our missions spread across the globe are the front line of this action, and my job through our bureaucracy, with the guidance of our Honourable Minister and the directives of the President and Prime Minister and the government, is to prepare our missions to deal with this. I'm sure that as much as we say so, preparation and doing is never enough. But all we can do is to have a good check on things. Over the last 2 days, we had teleconferences with all our missions in 5 groups, And we went through because the requirements in each place is different. South Asia is largely the focus is on students, with some people working in factories and Sri Lankan exporters who are in Bangladesh being a particular pocket. The Middle East is a whole other ball game, because there you have more than 1 million or even about 1.5 of Sri Lankan expatriate working force. Some are in houses, some are outside, some are those who are registered with the Foreign Employment Bureau, some are not registered. So you have a whole lot of issues which are not just corona related, but are fundamental issues of the nature of all the vulnerabilities a Sri Lankan who is not so well to do, who is dependent on an employer or employment is doing out there. Then when you go to countries like Malaysia, you find both the mix. You have students, you have about 1,000 students or a little less, but you have 20,000 workers as well. Then you can talk about the Australias and the Western countries where our populations out there are again largely student populations, other than for those who are either in those countries who are of Sri Lankan citizenship, holding Sri Lankan citizenship.
Right.
And it is to get a stock of this totality that we launched the web portal, because we felt that our data has been collected. Our estimate right now is that we have about 2.6 million Sri Lankans abroad. But we need to kind of be clear on this and have some hard data, particularly in this context, to be available and to be of assistance to these communities.
Contact Sri Lanka, the online web portal, launched on the 26th of March. To date, it has 45,770 Sri Lankans living abroad registered on this portal, and I think we need to invite more and more Sri Lankans living overseas to register on this web portal, because this is for the Foreign Ministry to be in touch with our foreign nationals, our Sri Lankans living overseas. But we'll speak more of the concerns that Sri Lankans are facing once we return after this short break at Hyde Park. As more and more Sri Lankans overseas are wondering whether they can return to Sri Lanka amid this global pandemic, as cities and countries across the world put all their resources together to combat this health crisis in the form of COVID-19. The Foreign Ministry of Sri Lanka issued a statement very recently requesting all Sri Lankans, Sri Lankan expatriates, to remain at their current locations until the risk of COVID-19 is minimized. And also, Foreign Secretary, you assured that requests for return to Sri Lanka will be considered once the spread of the virus is contained in the country. This was one of your very latest media releases. But in a turn of events, Australia, the Prime Minister of Australia yesterday at a press briefing announced that it is time for temporary visa holders to make their way back home. He said if they're not in a position to support themselves, then there is the alternative for them to return to their home countries. And something very strong I see is that as much as it is lovely to have visitors to Australia in good times, at times like this, if you're a visitor in this country, it is time, as it has been now for some while, and I know many visitors have, to make their way home. Have you tried to speak to the High Commission here and your mission abroad in Australia? What does this mean? This affects many Sri Lankans in Australia. Who are these temporary visa holders that they are referring to?
Yes, I was frankly very taken aback when I first heard that comment, and coming from a country where we, out of the 30,000 something tourists who were there, 2-3 weeks ago when we closed or limited arrivals, pretty much half of them are still in this country. And we are looking after them. Many of them must be staying in this country because, as I was in lighter vein saying, that they feel that we will handle this in some systematic way, and also it's a tremendous confidence to our industry, tourist industry, that we not only look after ourselves, but we look after our visitors and guests through thick and thin. And there were some points where I think there were some concerns, and that was very immediately dealt with by our both the political leadership as well as the bureaus which are dealing with tourism. So it's in that context that, you know, this was a little surprising, but I've been assured. Before I came here, I spoke to David Holly, the Ambassador, High Commissioner for Australia, and he has reassured me that this was not, and I repeat, not meant for students. That the idea in the Australian comment was essentially about visitors, which was tourists. And what they were trying to say is that they were encouraging those who were there on short-term visas to kind of, you know, get back home. I mean, that is for each country to take its decision.
But Foreign Secretary, Sri Lanka being a small nation, you are intervening, you are in negotiation with other missions, with other countries through the Sri Lankan missions to extend visas of Sri Lankans who are in other countries on temporary visa. At the same time, these countries, you would be reaching out to Australia, I presume. But a statement as this, because this is a global pandemic, we have shut our airports down. And is it ethical for a nation to request nationals of other countries to leave? Because yes, at good times you have the foreign exchange coming in, but at bad times too you stick together.
Well, that's above my pay scale to answer that question, but all I can say is I think that different countries have to deal with it in different ways. I mean, you know, and if the Australian High Commissioner here tells me that this, and I think the real impact on this was really not mainly on the tourists. I think I mean, to me, we have I understand, we have about 12,000 Sri Lankan students living in Australia, and 586,000 altogether. That's more than 1 million from all over the world in Australia. So I think, and students is a big industry to the universities. So I was rather surprised as I said it. But I think we have to leave each country in fairness to decide on how they deal with this problem in a manner which is reasonable, which does not unduly inconvenience people. And I understand from Sri Lanka's request, we did it unilaterally. We didn't do it in a negotiated way, extending. We were one of the earliest countries to extend all those who were in this country. I think it was to lapse on the foreign visitors or any category of visa holders till the 15th of April, and then earlier this week we extended it to the 12th of May. So, but I think we must leave each country to make their call, and many countries I know have responded to our appeal, and people who are out there on visit visas have been told to contact the nearest visa outpost. Our embassies are working with those foreign ministries and making that information known to our parties.
But if Australia does not change their stance on this, where they request and encourage visitors to travel home, what will be the measures taken by the foreign ministry, especially because we have a large number of Sri Lankan visitors there too on temporary visa? What will we do? Because I think we have to really look at the number at this present moment, and the Australians will have to tell us that, because they are the ones who have issued the visas for them to go. So I guess once the numbers are known and what the scope of, I mean, when you go for a short-term visit, I mean, is it on a 1-month visa, you know, is it 3 months? I guess there must be many parents visiting children or children visiting parents in this category.
whether they come under this categorization of those who don't have means. You know, so there might be some room there. I guess that this really probably applies to somebody who is on a very short visa, a short visit. But I'm sure that this is something. Let us discuss this with the Australians. I'm sure that there are certain norms and processes. But I can very firmly assure you that this does not apply to students, which I think this morning when we heard about it was the real worry. I think parents are in any case very concerned. You know, I mean, for the last 2 weeks, there have been many parents who I have spoken to personally, spend a lot of time on whenever I have been spoken to, because I understand the feeling and the worry of a parent. You know, I mean, we all would love in situations like this to have our kids with us, you know, so that we could kind of be sure that they are tucked into bed, kind of. But when you face a larger situation like this, you have to balance interests,
right,
and try to safeguard everybody. Maybe children who are sitting in a hostel out there are safer sitting there than actually trying to, even if the airport was open, even if flights were there, trying to come through all that. And we saw that now, I mean, this latest story of how that one gentleman got the disease, that he was caught in the midst of those who came from Italy. Now that is
at the airport.
That is once it's a funny, it's a irony that, you know, how I mean, and all of us today are sitting here quite well, but I mean, who knows what happens tomorrow? And I think in our culture we are attuned to understanding that reality. So, but my sense is that we have to try to, governments have to try to find what the best solution is in a whole of government way.
As we speak of Sri Lankan students, Foreign Secretary, you say a number of them are there. It's better for them to remain there until this whole situation is under control. But what of their food, sanitation and other requirements? At what level are you connected to them? Yes, through the missions, but there may be students who are not reachable at this time too, because cities are under lockdown or certain countries shut down and only emergency services in place. But let's talk a little about the challenges that Foreign Ministry faces.
That depends from country to country, and also of the cultures of those countries. Now, my sense is that pretty much in South Asia and probably Southeast Asia as well, that we have a pretty good idea of students. And I also want to relate this. There must be many parents watching this, that, you know, I'm sure that children are anxious. I don't know if the children are more anxious or parents are more anxious. I think the parents probably are more anxious sometimes than the children. And I think you reinforce that anxiety on each other. But what my advice to my colleagues has been to don't give expectation which you can't fulfill. It's much better to be sensitive to concerns and try to respond to real issues rather than to be giving people false hope at a time like this.
Right.
Now, just this simple announcement clarifying what the situation on the ground was and the reluctantly but definite decision the government took that to not bring back folks. I think that calmed things down to some extent.
Right.
Our missions, which earlier had to be on the one hand answering questions, why aren't you sending our kids back, or why aren't you sending the workers back, had now to deal with only one part of their problem, which was how do you look after them where they are. And I think that clarifies matters. And our effort right now, and I am satisfied that most of our missions, again, not all in the same way, because the resources are different, the circumstances are different. You can't you know, it's not, you can't wave a magic wand in this. But they are pretty much connected. Now, yesterday, for instance, 3 days ago, on Contact Sri Lanka, and we, as you know, Contact Sri Lanka was a joint exercise we did with ICTA, and we have very good cooperation and collaboration that was put up in less than a week.
Right.
At 12:53, on that site, somebody said that they were having a problem with their stipend in I think somewhere in southern India, I think Bangalore. It reached me by about 2:30. I was somewhere. I put it to my High Commissioner, acting High Commissioner in Delhi by 3:30. By 6 o'clock, we had fixed the problem. And he had contacted the Foreign Office, which was dealing with the stipends. And there was an understanding that the stipends will be paid a little in advance, so that this problem was sorted. Yesterday, there was a problem of somebody stuck on the border, trying to cross from Thailand to Laos. Within a few hours, we were able to get them to talk to our ambassador in Thailand, and who also is concurrently accredited to Laos, and we were able to get that sorted. So I think
there's a lot of resources put together to address concerns of Sri Lankans. We'll talk about all that when we return after this short break. Welcome back. We're in discussion with Foreign Secretary Ravinatha Aryasinha. Foreign Secretary, I think, moving away from challenges, I think, to look at the future, looking ahead, because Sri Lanka and the rest of the world can't be stuck in fighting, just fighting this pandemic. But exports, where our foreign exchange come from, we have certain challenges in the ongoing situation. Now, we know that the missions on the economic front, through your mission network, in collaboration with the Export Development Board, you'll be facilitating exporters during this volatile period. But imports, we have banned imports of non-essential items. Only for oil and other essential goods we have permitted. But at the same time, exports, we're looking at a manufacturing status in Sri Lanka, improving exports so that we can earn foreign exchange to facilitate those essential imports to the country. But what is the challenge at the moment that you are facing?
Yes, I think that is a very serious question, because we have to, as we deal with today, and we don't know how long today will last, but we have to think of the day after. And I think countries which are going to succeed in coming out of these are those which are able to do both, maybe different people, but I think it is equally important. And in the Foreign Ministry, our officers who are handling the economic division is focused essentially at this point in trying to get together with the EDB, the Tourist Board, the BOI, and other agencies. Like the tea is a classic example. This is a point where Sri Lanka's tea might get a good market. Because tea is seen as a good beverage in these times, in this, you know, hot drink and all that. And one problem was that the tea auctions had stalled. So exporting became difficult. But I'm very happy that today we have done electronically started the tea auctions going. So I think this is a good step. Now in Turkey, I understand there is some opportunity to increase our market. So similarly, if we can push the kinds of products which we have a niche, which we have the production lines, because one good thing which Sri Lanka has done is, while we have shut down a lot, tea estates, I understand, are working. The agricultural production side is still working. So if we can keep those going, at least we can ensure supply. Now, demand is another matter.
Right.
I think countries are compressing their orders because they are not quite sure whether Walmart is going to be open for a while again. So now that is the buyer. So I think both sides have to work, but all Sri Lanka can do is to try to make sure that our supply lines are doing well. And also, interestingly, there are new products which have emerged from this. That protective gear, that space kit-like thing. Apparently, we are manufacturing that now. We are manufacturing it for ourselves, and there are some countries which are asking for samples. And we have already provided some samples of it. So the niche we had in garments manufacturing, if we can convert to this kind of product, that will in future give us some new openings. And I think we have to do that because countries like Vietnam are doing it very well in these circumstances. So if we have to keep ahead of that curve, and while we are on the one hand fighting to keep the disease down, those who are in the productive sectors have to also keep the exports going. And similarly on tourism, I think as I said earlier, the 15,000 who are continuing here will be the biggest advertisement Sri Lanka can provide to tourism in the future. You know, I recently saw...
The fact that we're taking care of them while...
that guy who talked on BBC after visiting Sri Lanka, I think a couple of days ago, that was an advertisement which we couldn't pay any money for. How Sri Lanka takes care of them, also about how Sri Lanka is handling things themselves. So that gives a certain confidence to audiences out there. I mean, you know, I'm sure that lots of us in Sri Lanka are kind of ranking and raving that we can't get out of the house, can't do this, can't do that. You know, this is not there, that is not there.
But there are bigger
issues. But there we are trying to deal with a huge issue. And coming out of it is, and it's a very insidious one. You can't kind of calculate where corona is going to come to you from. You know, I mean, so therefore I think on the economic front, we are at early stages, but we have to kind of get the niche industries working, and I think this is a thought which must percolate right down to the worker in a factory, because he or she is not only working, is important. I mean, if by factories closing down, those who are on daily wages, irregular employment will lose their work, but they also are keeping that clock going in terms of production and manufacture. Similarly, even those of our citizens out abroad should be, while being anxious, and I'm sure that if there is a real calamity, I'm sure the government of Sri Lanka is going to step in. They must have that confidence that now at this point we feel that this is the right decision. Down the road, things can change. So I think with that confidence, I think we will succeed to the extent that each of us, as far as we can, go about our business as usual, more careful, more protected. The parents here in Sri Lanka sleeping a little more comfortably, hoping and knowing that the embassy is there a call away. And if there are some real issues, that they will deal with it. Similarly, for industry, similarly in any walk of life. I mean, this is not a foreign affairs issue alone. This is a national issue. And I guess we are good at dealing with difficult issues.
Yes, Sri Lanka rushed to bring students, as I mentioned at the beginning, to bring back students from Wuhan and pilgrims, as well as other students from across the world where the need arose. But again, I'd like to go back to economic activity. Yes, this is not your normal line of work, but the foreign ministry is very important at this juncture. Looking ahead, post-pandemic situation, right now Sri Lanka needs to be figuring out a way forward, an economic blueprint to find out how we address the country's needs as a self-sustained nation. When we can't import, we have to look at manufacturing. And you spoke of certain areas that Sri Lanka has already ventured into, and how tea might be the solution to Sri Lanka's economic woes at the moment. But specifically, what are the missions doing right now to speak to these nations? Because given these situations, there might be other requirements for Sri Lanka to cater to. And we have the workforce, we have our...
which is going to, some income drop is going to happen. We have to be realistic about that.
Certainly. And let's talk about economic zones too. What sort of a role will they play if we revive these economic zones?
I think it is important that we do that, because I think these are all signals as well. You know, I don't think in Vietnam they shut down any economic zones. Maybe economic zones there are not right in the center of everything, and therefore it probably is easier, you know, if you were, you know, out there in a zone, then you continue to work so long as you have your food and you have your, you know, space and all that. So I think maybe we need to kind of, you see, Indeewari, I think these circumstances bring to all of us choices. If in normal life we can do anything and everything we want, when we have a little less money or a little less freedom or something like this, we start adjusting to what we have and how we can do that thing. So maybe an industry also, you have to identify some target industries which need to keep going to meet a demand. And again, the demand side is equally problematic. You can produce all the garments you want. If there's nobody to buy it, what do you do? So I think you've got to be on your toes. And one thing our missions are right now doing, and we have asked them, is to see what are the ones which are going to continue, what might be the ones in danger. Understanding that dichotomy is important for us. And what are the ones which might be futuristic, because that's the supply line we have to work. There is also a problem about backward linkages. You can't make garments without having the fittings you might need. And the supply chains being cut or disrupted, as you might call it now. But I understand that now from China, cargo is coming, so that the stuff, the backward linkages are being restored to a large extent. And I think we got to just focus on a few things and do them well. And also have confidence in each other that if we each do our job, we will pull through this together. One must not try to do the other person's job. If you do your job right, then I believe that society as a whole will be able to get through this. It's a difficult patch. We've been there before. I'm sure we'll come out of it as well.
And on that note, we'll take a short commercial break to return at HydePark on AdaDerana 24. Welcome back. You're joining us at HydePark, and I'm speaking to the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Ravinatha Aryasinha. I think we, in this fight against COVID-19, Foreign Secretary, there is a requirement for immediate medical supplies. How is your work in terms of coordinating with other countries in order to have Sri Lanka access to these medical equipment, especially also drugs that we require?
Absolutely. I think this has been something from day one which has been done through the missions. The general process is that the health department would tell us they want something. Once we have their sanction, we would leverage with the relevant country and their authorities. Some are very commercial transactions which are easy to do. Some involve government. Sometimes priority has to be given in some countries, and it is to the credit of all our missions where this sourcing has been taking place, that we have been able to get stuff and get them on the next flight, as you have seen regularly things coming in.
Right.
We also have to be careful because we must not get stuff which is not essential at this point. The drugs which are coming and all, you know, I mean, there are a lot of people trying to sell their wares, but we must have some control. And so we are not trying to get anything, even when we are given it free, which is not sanctioned and not authorized by the health authorities, because they have to be the captain in telling us whether this is to be brought or not to be brought, because it comes from both sides. You know, there are new products as well. But our ambassadors are on the ball on that, and they are keeping us abreast of new developments, particularly the test kits. It's a big debate on, you know, at what point do you test, how fast a test is good, and all that. So we are doing that, but we are allowing health to lead and tell us what they want, and we will do what they want, and that's how it's going. And the COVID control operation is also working with us on this from time to time, making requests. So there is a good check and balance on how we are procuring material, medicines and material for this.
In terms of international assistance, we talk about the SARC fund, we talk about your ministry and the mission being in contact with missions overseas who are in touch with their respective countries and foreign ministries, and also China sending assistance. But if we look at a larger picture here, how far are we in calling for assistance and accepting these, especially when most of these bigger nations are also facing and are crippled in the face of this pandemic?
Yes, I think we are taking and we are giving as well. The SARC fund is money. We are putting down $5 million, which all the SARC countries can draw on. That's giving. There is a stock of tea on the way to UK to be given to the NHS, which could have do with a cup of tea at this point when they are under a lot of pressure. And I think we are trying to be generous and helpful in places we can. We at the same time are also receiving a lot of assistance. As you can see, the World Bank and IMF have made some provisions available to us. We also know that we are receiving assistance both from government sources as well as non-governmental sources and the Sri Lanka communities out there. That's a very tangible way. Yes, they are very worried about themselves, but in true Sri Lankan spirit, these are the very people who are also collecting stuff to be sent to Sri Lanka. Yesterday, we had to, in fact, try to encourage some of them whether it is more practical to send in money to the fund or to send material stuff which we have to freight and might take a little longer with all the cargo restrictions, flight restrictions. So these are all again choices which we are making. But besides this material stuff, there are also processual help we need. Now, back again to the Middle East, where I really believe that we must be very conscious that that is where our biggest issue is, because the largest overseas Sri Lankan population, and a population which has funded a lot of the taxpayers, you know, giving a lot to this country through foreign exchange, they are there, and this is an occasion where not only must we, but they feel that we are not standing by them enough, and it is important that we stay with them through this. So we are
what can we do?
We are talking to organizations like the IOM, to organizations like Caritas, to try and help some of these people. They are out of jobs. Some of them are illegal, as I said. So we have to find ways and means. In fact, today I told someone in IOM, treat this as the Gulf War. If this is a war, then you can't sit back and say, no, 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 this is not in the book. We have to find ways of getting rules for these things. On our own, at some point, right now, we have given some of the, we haven't given all missions a carte blanche money allocation, but in some places where people were stuck in an airport and couldn't come, we have to look after those people. Not people who are traveling out. We are not in a, we don't have the capacity at this point to, you know, if someone, I mean, yes, we can share a meal, but we have to anticipate that if this goes long, that there might be people out of jobs. There might be people who are citizens of Sri Lanka, whose responsibility lies squarely and surely on Sri Lanka's shoulders. And if they are not going to be welcome in those countries, then we have to deal with that. We have to be prepared for that.
To add to that, I'd like to ask you one final question. We have a couple of minutes to go before we wrap up the program. Communities, Sri Lankan nationals, our very own overseas, they can now play a bigger role than they usually do in helping Sri Lanka, in mitigating effects of COVID-19. So how can we bring them together in this fight? How do we interface with the rest of the world? What is the way forward, Foreign Secretary? Finally.
No, I think that is happening. I don't think we have to do that. I mean, I think all it is, I think right now there is a little bit of juggle between worrying for oneself and worrying about a larger cause. But one way, as we all know, that one way to deal with worrying for oneself is to look at a larger cause. And I think in many places, like I said, there's collections being made, equipment being procured, and ventilators, for instance, yesterday from New York, they were trying to send some ventilators to Sri Lanka. And we wanted to match whether what they were trying to send is the system for the health authorities. Today we were told it's okay, so I'm sure it'll be on the next flight. So they are doing it, and I think all we can do is to encourage them to do more. And I think that I would say sending funds at this time, transfers, might be the more quick and materially easier thing to do. Similarly, we are also requesting governments who are friendly governments who might be inclined to make some help to give us financial support to get through this, and also give us some financial redress by rescheduling some of the loan payments and all that. So all these exercises are happening. So my sense is that time will tell how successful we are. But right now, what the Foreign Ministry and the rest of the government can do is to deal with the present situation and prepare and anticipate for difficulties ahead, and also the day after, like I said, on the economic sense.
Right, thank you very much. But I'd like to remind our viewers of something you said. The Sri Lankan government will step in where necessary, but for our very own overseas, stay where you are, remain at your current locations and stay safe. Thank you for joining us at Hyde Park. We had with us the Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka, Ambassador Ravinatha Aryasinha, joining us at Hyde Park tonight.